Hale here. Before we begin, a quick note. If you value independent journalism and deep document-based reporting, there's a support link below. Now let's talk about what happened in federal court this morning. At 9:14 a.m. Eastern Time, a court order was entered that legal analysts say could mark one of the most consequential enforcement moments ever involving a former U.S. president. This isn't about campaign rhetoric. It isn't about polling. It's about judgments, asset exposure, and what happens when financial liability collides with political ambition. Tonight, we're breaking down what the court actually authorized, how enforcement mechanisms work in high-value civil cases, what properties could potentially be at risk, and why the financial implications may matter just as much as the legal ones. If you want real-time legal and financial analysis, not spin, not outrage, hit that like button and subscribe, because when court enforcement begins, the consequences move faster than the headlines. Let's begin. At precisely 9:14 a.m. Eastern Time today, a court order was issued that legal analysts are describing as the most assertive enforcement action ever taken against a former U.S. head of state. If you had been at the federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan just 90 minutes earlier, you would have witnessed an unprecedented event. A senior district judge, after examining 847 pages of financial analysis, signed a property transfer order allowing the immediate sale of assets to cover pending civil judgments. This is no mere threat or warning. This is an execution. Donald Trump already grappling with criminal charges in 4 different regions, seeing his business empire dismantled by a New York fraud monitor, and losing support from key Republican donors has been hit by the one thing his legal team feared more than incarceration: the total transfer of property ownership from his control to court-appointed receivers. In this detailed report, we will uncover which properties are being seized right now, reveal the private turmoil inside Trump Tower at this very moment, explain why this property transfer order is immune to appeal or delay, and demonstrate the disastrous financial chain reaction that starts the moment this order is carried out. Donald Trump is not merely losing a legal battle. He is witnessing the physical dismantling of everything he built his identity on. The plan was always to delay. That has been Trump's legal strategy for 5 decades. Entangle creditors in endless litigation, overwhelm adversaries with motions and appeals, drag out proceedings until the opposition is exhausted financially or runs out of patience. It was supposed to work this time too. The $464 million New York civil fraud judgment entered in February 2024. The $83 million defamation verdict from March 2024. All were meant to vanish into the slow-moving gears of the legal system. Trump's lawyers filed 14 separate motions to delay enforcement. They requested bond reductions, argued constitutional violations, and claimed presidential immunity extended to civil judgments. Every motion was designed to push the reckoning far into the future, ideally past the 2024 election, when Trump believed he could erase these issues with executive power. But the cost was more than just legal fees. It was the total erosion of credibility with the only people who still mattered: the ultra-wealthy donors and institutional investors who fund political campaigns and business ventures. These are not ideologues, but cold calcs of risk and return. When Trump inflated property values for loans, that was business. When he got caught and refused to pay the judgment, that became a liability. When he continued to fight instead of settling, he became untenable. The backlash came from an unexpected quarter, not Democrats or prosecutors, but from the financial institutions that had supported him for decades. Deutsche Bank, his longtime lender, discreetly closed his accounts in March 2024. The Republican National Committee, once wholly under his influence, revised its donor agreements to prevent Trump from directly accessing funds. Major GOP mega-donors, individuals who had written 8-figure checks to Trump, aligned super PACs, suddenly fell silent. They stopped returning calls and redirected money to other candidates. They were distancing themselves from a man who had become more costly to support than to abandon. Trump gambled that his political support would translate into financial backing. He assumed that loyalty from voters equated to loyalty from financiers. He assumed that attacking the judge, the prosecutor, the system would generate enough outrage to nullify the consequences. He assumed wrong. While his rallies still attracted crowds, those with real capital were making different calculations. And this morning, that calculation led to a judge signing an order that strips Trump of what he believed made him untouchable, his property. At 9:14 a.m., Judge Arthur Enneron, the same Manhattan judge who oversaw the fraud trial, signed an emergency property transfer order submitted by the judgment creditors. The order was not shared with Trump's legal team for review, nor announced in advance. It was filed under temporary seal at 8:30 a.m. and approved 44 minutes later. For those 44 minutes, there was silence. No one outside the courthouse knew what was happening. Then the order was unsealed and uploaded to the public docket. The notification was sent simultaneously to the U.S. Marshals Service, the New York County Sheriff's Office, and the court-appointed receivers, who had been on standby for 3 weeks. Witnesses outside Trump Tower described what followed. At 9:47 a.m., 3 black SUVs arrived at the main entrance on Fifth Avenue. 6 federal marshals emerged from the vehicles along with 4 individuals in business attire carrying secured document cases. They were the receivers. Court-appointed financial experts with legal authority to take immediate control of any property listed in the seizure order. The building's security team, clearly unprepared, made several phone calls before stepping aside. The marshals did not enter the residential floors. They went directly to the Trump Organization offices on the 26th floor. But this was just the start. The nightmare was only beginning. While the marshals were entering Trump Tower, a second team was simultaneously arriving at 40 Wall Street, the landmark office building Trump has owned since 1995. At that exact moment, a third enforcement team was being escorted into Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey. Most surprisingly, a fourth team of receivers was arriving at Seven Springs Estate, Trump's 213-acre property in Westchester County, used both as a private residence and business retreat. 4 simultaneous enforcement actions across 3 jurisdictions, all coordinated to prevent any asset transfers or destruction of documents. This was not a legal filing. It was a tactical operation. Pause. The markets do not care about political spin. They care about financial reality. Within 90 minutes of the property transfer order being unsealed, commercial real estate analysts at Goldman Sachs issued a memo to institutional investors warning that Trump-branded properties were now considered distressed assets. The valuation models changed instantly. Properties that Trump claimed were worth $500 million in loan applications were now being assessed at forced sale prices, potentially 40 to 60% below market value. The Trump Organization's credit rating, already junk status, was downgraded again. And here is the truly devastating part. The interest on the outstanding judgments continues to accumulate. Even as properties are being seized, Trump still owes $464 million plus interest, accruing at $111,000 per day. Each day without payment adds another 6 figures to the debt. The property transfer order does not stop the bleeding. It just initiates the liquidation process. According to court documents unsealed this afternoon, we now know what happened in the 72 hours before this order was signed. A sealed emergency conference took place on Monday, November 11th at 4 p.m. Participants included Judge Angaran, the lead attorney for the New York Attorney General's office, the attorney for E. Jean Carroll, who holds the $83 million defamation judgment, and a senior partner from a forensic accounting firm retained by the court. The topic was straightforward. Trump had missed the November 1st deadline to post appeal bonds. He had submitted no payment plan and secured no financing. The creditors wanted immediate enforcement. Audio from the proceeding, recorded but sealed until this morning, has been leaked to multiple outlets. You hear Judge Angerin ask a simple question. Has the defendant made any attempt whatsoever to satisfy these judgments? The response from Trump's attorney was evasive. We are exploring all options, Your Honor. Judge Ingram's reply was icy. Exploring is not paying. The judgments are final. I am authorizing the creditors to proceed with asset seizure under the most aggressive timeline permitted by law. The call ended. The decision was made. It was a calculated business decision. The creditors, including the state of New York and Eugene Carroll, considered Trump's history. They saw decades of delay tactics, properties shuffled between LLCs to avoid collection. A man who had just announced a new business venture while claiming he couldn't pay court judgments. They realized waiting for Trump to voluntarily pay was futile. They understood he had become a debtor who would resist until forced. The decision was made. Pursue immediate seizure, lock down the assets, bring in receivers, stop negotiating with someone who has no intention of ever settling. As the receivers entered Trump Tower this morning, sources say the audio feed from the lobby security camera was not immediately cut. You hear urgent conversations, someone identity unclear saying, "Get him on the phone now." Footsteps running, an elevator door closing, the feed cuts. What happened in those next 20 minutes is still emerging, but multiple reports from staffers inside the building describe absolute chaos. Phone calls to attorneys, emergency texts to political advisors, a desperate scramble to figure out what legal mechanism could stop what was already in motion. There was none. Why did this happen? Why did a judge authorize such aggressive action? Follow the pattern of behavior. Donald Trump has spent his entire life using the legal system as a weapon of delay. He has been involved in more than 4,000 lawsuits over 5 decades. The Trump legal playbook is well documented. Never settle early, always file appeals, drag out discovery, exhaust the opponent's resources. In 90% of cases it worked. Contractors gave up. Small businesses couldn't afford to keep fighting. Creditors settled for pennies on the dollar. Trump walked away having paid a fraction of what he owed. But this time, the opponent is different. The state of New York has unlimited resources. Eugene Carroll has a legal team funded by wealthy backers determined to see this through to the end. These creditors are not running out of money. They are not giving up. And they studied Trump's playbook. They knew he would delay. They prepared for it. They assembled forensic accountants who spent 9 months mapping every Trump asset, every LLC, every shell company, every property transfer. They built an enforcement strategy designed to move faster than Trump's legal team could respond. And this morning, they executed it. This shifts power completely. Trump can no longer control which assets are sold or when. He cannot negotiate directly with buyers. He cannot move properties between entities. The court-appointed receivers now have legal authority to operate as the functional owners. They can access bank accounts, review contracts, make operational decisions. Trump has been reduced from owner to bystander. He is just a man watching strangers inventory his possessions by authorizing the property transfer order instead of waiting for traditional foreclosure proceedings. Judge Angerin sent a message. The court will not allow Trump to weaponize delay. When powerful, institutions refuse to comply with judgments, the system must move decisively. This is what decisive enforcement looks like. What legal and financial analysts are already calling the Trump reckoning of 2024 has implications that extend far beyond real estate. This is the intersection of legal accountability and financial reality meeting political ambition. This is not just about paying a fine. This is about whether someone with sufficient resources and enough defiance can simply outlast the justice system. For decades, Trump proved that you could file enough motions, hire enough lawyers, exhaust enough time. Eventually, the system gives up. But the property transfer order demonstrates that when creditors refuse to quit and courts refuse to delay, the system has tools that even the wealthiest defendants cannot escape. The legal ramifications are unprecedented. Trump's attorneys are already preparing emergency appeals. But here is the problem. A property transfer order is not like a typical court ruling. It is an enforcement mechanism, not a new judgment. The time to appeal the underlying fraud verdict was months ago. Those appeals were filed and denied. The judgments are final. What Trump's team would have to argue now is that the enforcement method itself is unconstitutional. Legal experts say that argument has almost no chance of success. Property seizure to satisfy civil judgments is one of the oldest enforcement tools in American law. It has been used for centuries, or Trump is not facing some novel legal theory. He is facing standard debt collection executed by the government. If the receivers complete their asset valuations by the court-ordered deadline of November 20th, and those valuations show the seized properties are insufficient to cover the full $547 million debt that triggers the next phase, additional properties get flagged. Trump National Golf Club in Los Angeles, Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., the Trump Estate in Palm Beach. The list is extensive. The forensic accountants have already identified 23 properties that could be subject to seizure. If the first round of liquidations does not satisfy the judgment, the second round begins immediately. We are looking at a cascading liquidation that could strip Trump of nearly every major asset he has spent 50 years accumulating. Here is the domino effect. If Trump Tower gets sold to satisfy part of the debt, the Trump Organization loses its flagship location. If the golf courses get auctioned, Trump loses the venues he uses to host donors and political allies. If the residential properties get seized, he loses the symbols of wealth that his entire brand is built on. If these assets get liquidated at distressed prices, he loses billions in paper value. The Trump brand, which has always been about projecting success and wealth, gets publicly demolished. A desperate man who has built his identity entirely on being rich and powerful. Watching that identity physically dismantled in courtroom auctions becomes a political liability that even his most loyal supporters will struggle to defend. Foreign adversaries are absolutely watching this. Vladimir Putin is watching and seeing a man who might return to power, but is currently so financially desperate that he can be leveraged. Xi Jinping is calculating whether a president facing $500 million in debt represents an opportunity for economic pressure. America's allies in Europe are watching and questioning whether the U.S. political system can produce stable leadership. A financially compromised leader is a national security risk. Intelligence agencies know this. When someone owes that much money and has that much ego invested in recovering it, they become vulnerable to pressure that has nothing to do with ideology and everything to do with survival. Where is the Republican establishment? Where are the party leaders who once defended Trump unconditionally? Silence. Mitch McConnell has not issued a statement. Kevin McCarthy, who lost his speakership partly due to loyalty to Trump, has said nothing. The Republican National Committee released a one-sentence response calling this a politicized enforcement action, but offered no financial support. Why? Because they have done the same calculation the creditors did. Supporting Trump right now means associating with a man who is publicly losing his properties to debt collection. That is not a winner. That is a liability. They are distancing, repositioning, waiting to see if Trump survives this before deciding whether to support him or replace him. This creates a fracture in the conservative coalition that cannot be healed. On one side, the Trump loyalists who see this as persecution and will support him no matter what happens. They believe the system is rigged, that Trump is being targeted. They will donate to his legal defense funds. They will show up at rallies. On the other side, the institutional conservatives, the donors, the business leaders, the elected officials who care about winning elections and maintaining power. They see a candidate who is now a proven financial disaster, a man who lost nearly $1 billion in judgments and could not manage his own business affairs competently enough to avoid this outcome. These two factions cannot coexist. A divided Republican Party facing a general election cannot win the swing states that matter. The math does not work. Reports from sources inside Trump's inner circle describe a man who is not sleeping. He is on his phone at 3 a.m., sending messages to attorneys. He is obsessively refreshing news alerts, repeatedly asking the same question. How did they move this fast? How did they do this without us knowing? He is experiencing what financial psychologists call asset loss trauma. For someone who has defined himself entirely by what he owns, watching those possessions get cataloged by strangers is a psychological crisis. Staff members are reportedly limiting his media exposure, trying to prevent him from doing interviews where he might say something that creates additional legal problems. But controlling Trump has never been possible. The risk right now is that he does something reckless, something desperate, something that turns a financial crisis into a criminal one. The property transfer order is not just a legal document. It is a symbol of the limits of wealth as a shield against accountability. It represents the moment when the system stopped negotiating and started enforcing. Donald Trump wanted to be remembered as the richest president in history. He ended up as the first president to have his property seized by court order while potentially running for office again. He wanted empire. He ended up with liquidation. He wanted legacy. He got case law. You can manipulate press coverage, but you cannot manipulate property records. You can spin political narratives, but you cannot spin a sheriff's auction. The ultimate truth is this: reality wins. Court orders are not poll numbers. Asset seizures are not campaign rallies. When federal marshals show up with a signed enforcement order, the Twitter followers do not matter. The rally crowds do not matter. The only thing that matters is whether you can pay what you owe. And this morning, the world saw the answer. He cannot. So, where are we right now? Donald Trump is inside Trump Tower, which is no longer entirely his. Court-appointed receivers are operating on the 26th floor. The U.S. Marshals Service has completed its initial asset documentation. The state of New York has turned its full enforcement apparatus against him. The Republican donor class has quietly abandoned him. The conservative legal movement has declined to defend him. He is paradoxically both the front-runner for the Republican nomination and a man watching his properties get auctioned to pay debts. He is simultaneously the most powerful figure in conservative politics and completely powerless to stop what is happening to his assets. As we head into the next 2 weeks, expect increasingly erratic behavior. Trump will try to use media appearances to create public pressure on the judge. He might try to mobilize his political base to protest outside courthouses. He could even attempt to argue that enforcing these judgments interferes with his presidential campaign. Some novel constitutional argument that has never been tested. But here is what cannot be undone. The property transfer order is signed. The receivers have legal authority. The assets are documented. The enforcement machinery is in motion. The foundation of the Trump empire, the property portfolio that made him famous, is being systematically dismantled. The brand is destroyed, not damaged. Destroyed. When Trump Tower gets sold at auction, when the winning bid comes in below the price Trump claimed it was worth in loan documents, that is not spin. That is public record. When golf courses get liquidated to pay defamation judgments, that is not fake news. That is financial reality. The image Trump spent 50 years building, the billionaire dealmaker who always wins, collapses under the weight of courtroom facts. And in politics, image is everything. When the image breaks, there is no coming back. Subscribe to this channel immediately. We will be monitoring the receiver reports that must be filed by November 20th. If those reports show asset values below the debt threshold, We will break down which properties get seized next. If Trump's legal team files emergency appeals, we will analyze them in real time. If settlement negotiations begin and sources say they might, we will have that information first. This is not politics. This is history. This is the moment when the justice system proved that no one, regardless of wealth or power or position, is above enforcement. Watch closely. If you found today's reporting valuable and would like to support independent journalism, you'll find a link below. Your support helps keep the newsroom strong and independent. Thank you for watching.